Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm from ICR, where we lead an array of capital markets and strategic communications programs for private and public companies. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions today of these two ladies, Gail Glazerman and Casie Connolly. Gail, why don't you give your background for a minute, given Bloomberg, and I know you're not going to say it, but #1 stock picker previously, while at UBS as an analyst. Tell us more.
Sure. Gail Glazerman. I'm a senior ESG integration analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. I joined Bloomberg from an organization called SASB, which has become the leading financially oriented ESG reporting standard setter. But prior to that, I was an industry analyst, predominantly at UBS, covering paper and forest product stocks before I transitioned into ESG.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Casie Connolly. I am a principal with Longacre Square, which is a financial communications and investor relations advisory firm. We started the firm about a year and a half ago, and prior to that, had been working at Sard Verbinnen and Edelman, which are also large financial communications shops. Primarily work with advising alternative asset managers, fintech firms, publicly traded companies, but the majority of my work is involved with shareholder activism, whether it's on the activist or the company side, and working in special situations, whether that means debt restructuring, bankruptcies, and
ESG situations.
And ESG and everything that comes with crises as well. So.
Okay, thanks. So on the topic of male-female diversity as a corporate governance policy, why don't we set the table and just go over some of the data? I personally couldn't tell you today what percentage of women, what percentage of women occupy board seats, or the reverse. I'd like to hear a little bit more about what does the data tell us today? Maybe start with Gail.
Sure. So I'll just take a couple of different data sets and work with it. Bloomberg actually just within the last week released our latest update of our gender equality index. This is something that's been operating since 2015. It's about 70 questions across 5 pillars, including leadership, pipeline, pay, cultural equality efforts. And about 600 companies responded. We've scored about 500 within that grouping. It's global across all industries. About 32% of the average board is women. 62% of respondents had over 30% females on their board. A couple of other data points there. 41% of attrition last year was from females, but 44% of hires. And that correlates pretty well with the S&P. So some analysis we published earlier this week, about 32% of the S&P, 32.1, was women. That reflects about 5% growth year on year, which is down from about 8%. And from the prior 2 years, which means about a further year at that rate of growth before you'd hit parity. A couple of other data points at 32 compares to about 15% in Japan, but nearly 40% in Europe. And just 2 other data points before I finish.
Yeah.
So about 21 companies in the S&P have gender parity or better on their boards, and looking at sector dispersion, consumer staples and consumer discretionary have the highest representation.
And where do we see the least representation?
Materials, industrials, and energy. I probably could have had people guess, and that's probably what you would have guessed at.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, great. Well, what do we think are the benefits of diversity that are measurable? Is there, when you're going through the diversity index, really ultimately, what do companies say are the ultimate goals of those efforts? Financial returns, women back in the workforce after leaving on leave. What are the ultimate goals there?
I think those probably will have changed and maybe be a lot more sincere after what everyone's been going through hiring in the past year.
Right.
Sometimes it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg because there's a lot of pressure for companies to do this externally, and it's feels morally good to say that you're looking at diversity and building it. Whether or not they can really look and prove why they want to do it versus why they say they want to do it,
Right.
is perhaps a little bit of a debate there. But certainly, there's a lot of benefits in improving retention, having a greater labor pool to pull from. There have been some consultant studies that proved the benefits. I'm not sure they're definitive about whether or not causation versus correlation.
Right, it must be hard to isolate exactly what causes ups and downs over time in the performance, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we've done a lot of analysis of this, and it's been really, unfortunately, hard to sit there and prove a financial or valuation benefit. We have found a benefit of greater reduced volatility, but then isolating that to the gender balance on the board versus larger companies tend to have better balance. It becomes
Right.
it becomes pretty hard to isolate, as you said, which isn't to discourage companies from doing it by any ways, and we can maybe dig into that a little bit more.
Okay, great. So data-wise is my takeaway that there's no clear, consistent correlation between investing in companies that are more diverse, having higher ROI over time than the opposite?
A very minute benefit potentially in the US where the top quintile does outperform the lowest quintile that doesn't necessarily hold in other regions.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's talk about, let's see, some of the rules that we've seen take place over the years, right? I know there were some listing rules, there might be some legislation, there's banks that put rules in place about male, female, and diversity quotas on the board as companies go public. In light of the last panel that was quite exciting about the IPO and listing market in the future, let's talk a little bit about, what are the rules in place that companies need to follow?
So I think most of the people in this room are aware that in 2018, California put a law into place that required public companies that were headquartered and based in California to have up to 3 female directors on the board, depending on the actual size of the board. It was challenged pretty strongly by different industry groups and was eventually struck down. But interestingly enough, it was struck down because it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution. And the judge actually cited that in the initial argument to have this rule be put into place, that there was a strong argument that claimed that diverse boards would actually directly boost the California economy.
Oh,
And
interesting.
And when, over the course of, I believe it was struck down last year, over the course of that time, it didn't look like there was any direct evidence to actually support that initial claim that the state had really argued for. So that kind of, dovetails back into what Gail was saying, that there may or may not actually be direct evidence that supports this, which is quite interesting. So despite California's efforts to be the front runner in all things ESG, it didn't exactly pan out for them long term. Conversely, Hawaii, within the last within the last month or so, Bloomberg actually just reported on this yesterday, that Hawaii has introduced a new measure within their legislature to enact a very similar rule. Now, as we were kind of discussing this, it's quite interesting, obviously, Hawaii being a set of very small islands. There's only 22 public companies that are headquartered in the the Hawaiian Islands. So the actual impact, theoretically, that could create is quite small.
Right.
But however, maybe these, despite California being struck down, there was actually, in the few years that it was enacted, there was considerable change on the board structures. I believe it went up to as high as nearly 30% in terms of, women actually having a considerable presence on boards. So it's perhaps some of these things are symbolic, and even though they were in action for a few years, have been some people that have argued that is justification enough. But again, the main question is, does it actually move the needle in terms of returns or shareholder value at the end of the day?
Right, or if there's other stakeholders, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important as we say this to maybe keep some perspective that some of these initiatives are quite new. And so, a lone woman on a board of 12 people is not going to necessarily move the needle. And so in some levels, you need maybe a critical mass and then just also time to affect change.
Right.
And I mean, as we said before, also isolating these factors is quite
difficult.
challenging. And a woman, for the sake of being a woman, also isn't going to mean something. You need the right people. No matter how good she is, a woman's not going to be able to fix, a company in a bad business.
And I think one point that's really interesting about what Gail was just saying is that when we see activists, when they're nominating board members, you can take a look at, for example, what happened with Kohl's and McCallum. I'm not sure if you all followed that. McCallum went after Kohl's 2 years in a row. The first year, they were able to get two board members actually seated on the board and replaced. The second year wasn't as successful, but the whole reason they ended up doing a second fight was because those two people on, a board that was over 10 people really couldn't create enough impact. Two people in isolation, was that big enough to move the ship? So I think that's interesting, tying into what Gail had to say.
No, it is. And I wonder, is this topic ever like a singular focus of an activist, or is it one of many patchwork quilt of efforts? You said something yesterday that was interesting about, I think it was McDonald's and a campaign there where, the issue was not just about gender diversity on boards. It was one of a laundry list of things, right?
Yeah, so have some colleagues in the room that worked with us on the McDonald's fight, and interestingly enough, the reason that Carl Icahn actually went after McDonald's to begin with was really an unkept promise from the company 10 years prior, but it was really more than just having gender equity on a board. It was really about representation of, okay, eventually this company needs to move forward, and animal welfare is part of their bottom line, ideally, especially if you look at how the treatment of animals is done in the EU. It was a factor, but they were actually one of the, besides Exxon, which was successful. McDonald's was infamously unsuccessful. But one of the only fights that happened because of ESG matters.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in because you said something that I think is really important, which was they made a promise and they didn't keep it. And I really think that's where ESG is moving and where data really plays in reporting, which is it's great to say we're going to do all these wonderful things, but if you don't actually show progress to getting there, you're not going to get the returns that these things potentially can deliver. And I think there's just a movement, both regulatory as well with investors, for greater accountability on that. And I think that's just super important. I think that that resolution was just a great example of it, even if it didn't really, garner that much success or support.
Yeah, and particularly with McDonald's, I think despite the hope that there would create real change, and there was some incremental change that did occur throughout the course of the campaign, but mainly symbolic, I think, to let other companies know that this could be a potential reason that an activist comes after you in the near future.
Well, so that's helpful. What advice would you give public company teams that are looking at, that are looking at listing over the next year or two from this perspective, as they think about what their board should look like, as they think about their ESG strategy, in the context of the gender question? What advice do you have?
Well, I think when companies are looking at the construction of their boards, gender is a factor, but it shouldn't be the only factor that you're looking at. Now, I think that there's a lot of, particularly when you look at activists, when they're recommending slates to potentially remove existing or incumbent board members, you face this problem of tokenism with women or just underrepresented communities generally, making sure that whatever slate they're putting forth is more diverse, because that's something that the company or an adversary could come back at you on and ding you on eventually, which never looks good with shareholders. The larger question that I think you're asking is really that you want to make sure, obviously, that your board is well constructed based on your business priorities. So you want to obviously have good operators, people that have good experience. Depending, obviously, if it's a retail company, you probably want someone who has had a significant amount of retail experience, or someone who is a really great real estate operator if the company plans on owning their real estate and not doing a sale leaseback situation. So gender, I think, needs to be, it's something that companies need to be thinking about as a consideration as they're constructing their board. But as activists, we see with a lot of our clients, as they go after companies, the gender construction is a point. It's not the entire reason. Right. They're typically going after companies based on poor performance or, the poor corporate governance generally, and we could go on and talk about a million reasons that fall under that category. But
well, it makes me question, what is the ideal? So if it is a point on a laundry list of issues, right? What is that against? Are there quotas in place that companies say, hey, we got to get to 3, 4, or 5? How do they even start to put together what their ideal board looks like from this identity perspective? Are there quotas in place?
I'd almost flip it the other way. So there are quotas, but then there's also a danger that a quota becomes a ceiling, and I think that's obviously a mistake as well. So there was some concern and talk that California initiative that Casie mentioned was kind of leading to slower growth because everyone's like, oh, we made our target. Let's stop. But there's also an initiative with NASDAQ, and it was a very low bar. It's being questioned, but they were also indicating basically by a couple of years from now, you need 2 diverse directors. But basically every large company was already meeting that criteria anyway. So, I think there's some risk that if people think about it only in the context of quotas,
right,
that's a mistake as well, because having a lot of diversity and different perspectives can be beneficial as long as the skills and the experience that they're bringing in addition to their gender or whatever diverse elements that they're bringing to your board are there.
Great. And Gail, is there any recent research out, maybe that you've authored, that listeners or potential public company C-suites should take a look at to get a deeper dive on the data?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we have the Gender Equality Index, which has 600 companies worth of reporting on 70 data points behind it. We have it's Bloomberg. We thrive on data, so
Right.
we have an endless amount of data. I mean, I'd say in terms of my own personal research that's related to this topic, I did a lot of work on some of the labor issues that have developed over the last year, and I think there's some fascinating kind of elements that are coming out of this that. You had some industries that were particularly struggling, obviously having to raise compensation really dramatically in order to, attract and retain staff. And I think it's starting to teach people that, labor isn't a commodity, and gender is certainly a factor in that. So if you are running a trucking company and less than 7% of your drivers are women, then, and you're struggling to hire people, well, there's almost half the labor force out there that you're missing. So if you can find small ways to tweak your business that makes it, that opens up a wider number of staffing, that's, a huge benefit. And I think the other thing that we're seeing, in some of the headlines, obviously there's some very high profile headlines on layoffs, but, behind the surface, when you get scratched below like Alphabet and Microsoft, is that, a ton of people are, far more reluctant, despite economic uncertainty, to let go of their staff. And I think they're starting to realize that, there's a huge cost in having to go find them and rehire them again, and that if you do, and one of the other elements is that certainly inflation and the pain that's inflicted on employees and the need for pay has been a headline, but a lot of these disputes are actually about non-monetary issues. So the train dispute that we saw, that before Congress had to act to prevent a strike, the big sticking point wasn't how much they were getting paid, it was how many sick days they were getting. And it was a quality of life issue, similar issues with airlines and pilots, and it just goes through
you mentioned the
that.
Indian Airlines, maybe, yeah.
So I was just scaring them while we're waiting for the panel to talk, mentioning that a couple of airlines are starting to loosen their training requirements to hire more pilots. But
That's scary.
yeah. But anyway, that. Besides the point. But I mean, it is quality of life issues are really starting to seep in, and I think companies that kind of recognize that and address that are going to be better positioned, and certainly in certain elements having a broad range of perspectives. So if 50% of your new hires are women, having more women on the board to understand some specific
The implications to females in trucking or in that particular industry, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting point, that from some of that, it needs to come from the top down to be able to actually impact change internally from a cultural perspective that ultimately then trickles down to the bottom line.
Sure. So do companies with diverse boards tend to have more diverse workforces as well? Is there a correlation there? Has your research looked at that?
A little bit of a mix. So like one of the conclusions from our gender equality index was that companies with a higher share of women on the board did tend to have a higher share of women in management. And just to understand, it drops off like just stunningly dramatically. So you go from about 50% of new hires being women to about a quarter of new hires being senior executives, and only 8% being CEOs. So there is some indication there. Some other analysis we've done, it's maybe a little less clear looking at broader data sets. So Europe, as I think I mentioned earlier, about nearly 40%, which is kind of in line with an EU directive of women on boards, but only about 22% in senior management. But then, as I said, taking time. If you look at a country like Norway, which has been on this path a lot longer, they have shown a little bit more progress. So I think some of it is this isn't changing overnight, but as you start to kind of embed it in the culture, it will hopefully take root.
So we talked about activist investors. What are some of the other stakeholders and constituents that companies need to think about that may have a reaction to having a diverse board or non-diverse board? So, for example, the retail investor or employees. Like, what are some of the other constituents that companies need to think about?
I mean, I think one of them for sure is the shareholder at the end of the day. And it depends on the type of company. As we were discussing the topics that we were going to chat about during this panel, Ashley, you were mentioning some of the companies that you work with,
right.
And I'll let you.
Oh yeah,
opine
just
on
very
them.
very consumer-facing media brands who may have a large percentage of a lot of their engagement on the consumer side are with millennials or are with women under the age of 25, right? So some of these topics may actually trickle down and be something that their consumer happens to care about or not care about. So, and also those are also retail investors.
Yeah.
So you can get yourself into a situation where if you don't have enough representation, you can be called out for that very publicly in Discord or on Reddit, and the next thing you know, you have something you actually have to speak to and deal with.
And that's, I think we've seen that even more in recent years, particularly with the proliferation of websites like StockTwits or people
Right.
becoming more active on Reddit and the retail community banding together, as we saw on GameStop. Although that had little to do, obviously, with
Diversity. Yeah.
But we're rather very excited by new board representation and really rallied behind that amongst other things. So I think the retail shareholder, particularly depending on the demographic that those folks
Right.
fall under, is incredibly important because they can clearly create an uprising and can create a big PR problem potentially, which can impact the stock price.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
I'd like to chime in on this as well with some recent headlines and tying it in. I do not envy any management team trying to navigate this right now.
Right.
I mean, so one of the perfect examples, very much in the news literally today, is what happened at Disney. That
Right.
they were staying quiet, their employees were forcing them to speak up, then it became a whole political storm, which is having really tangible, potentially financial
Impacts.
implications. And they're betwixt and between,
Right.
right? Like,
And with the
there's-
restructuring announced this morning.
I mean,
Yeah.
well, but also
And the
the
activists,
Florida
yeah.
legislation and impacting their tax status. So, it's become a very tough minefield, but I'll say, obviously, I have a bias. I work on ESG. I mean, it drives me nuts, like, hearing some of this pushback that there aren't financial returns and there aren't reasons for doing it. There are certainly, in some cases, issues that aren't material for a particular company that they may feel pressured to do something on just because there's someone saying it. But if they focus on the things that can really matter, so for a company like Disney, retaining employees, putting out content that's going to actually attract an audience.
Right.
Those things are really important, and diversity and incorporating diversity is huge. I'm sure you probably have examples of people
Many.
stumbling over representation and content.
Yes.
So there unfortunately are a lot of stakeholders, and one kind of the newer development is that they've got this like political backlash as
Yeah.
well, which is
Right, it's complicated. It's very complicated. Okay, well, thank you. Why don't we go to questions from the audience if we have any? Hi, go ahead. Sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, you can yell if you want. Okay.
Wait, where are you? Oh, there you go. No. That's what we're here for.
Philip Ballard with Hotel Planner. So women earn more college degrees now, they earn more advanced degrees. Women are starting more businesses than ever before. What I'm trying to, and they've been leaning in for 10 years, and we've been talking about this issue for 30 years. So what I'd love to know is, I'm trying to pinpoint the actual issue. Is the issue that there's still an old boys club culture in corporate America, and or not enough women are staying in the workforce when they're in their child rearing years, and that's part of the issue. And so maybe we need to incentivize women to, remote work, flex work opportunities when they're raising children, so there's no work gaps. Is that part of the issue? Because we've been talking about this issue for so many decades, and we're all I'm rambling. We're all responsible for fixing it, but I keep coming back to are there some women that get to a certain point in their career where they don't want to advance any further? And that's another part of the issue. How many women actually want to be in the C-suite, actually desire to be on a board? And so I'll leave it there.
Those are really good questions. I mean, I can answer them personally, but I don't have any data to support any of it.
Yeah, I mean, this
Maybe
is
you
more,
see more.
I mean, this
Yeah.
is more of a gut feeling. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very much like systemic racism as well. And I mean, I'll take an example from AI, something else often in the news. Like if you teach AI to like sort through resumes, you end up running into the risk that because you see men get higher, that, you know, therefore it assumes that like picking a man, if you don't actively correct for that, you're going to end up seeing a lot more male candidates, just because if you look at history, that's what made it to the top. So there is still a lot of that that's taking time to work through. And, you know, certainly there are women that want to raise their children and stay at home, but there are also things that companies don't do that could accommodate women and make it more encouraging for them to actually come back. And I think that's tying it back to the kind of initial discussion, where you start to have more women at the top that have had that lived experience.
Right.
It's much easier to like think through what policies, what changes, what things might you do to hold on to that talent and make sure you're utilizing it and taking advantage of it.
I have a
Right, go ahead.
slightly different, I totally agree with everything Gail said. There's an article that came out somewhat recently, and I think ISS has actually published some information on this around the women that do end up becoming on boards. They become overboarded in a lot of situations. So, you know, like, okay, this woman has been on, you know, say she was on the board of Target or something, and, you know, because she's been on one, she gets asked to be on many others, and it's that introductory experience that's incredibly important. But the problem, I think, that at least I've heard is that, you know, a lot of these women get overboarded, and the opportunities, they do exist, but they're with a smaller subsection of people. And I think the opportunity for men to also senior leaders, male leaders within a company that women work under, to be mentored and be able to have those opportunities, I think is also incredibly important. Speaking from personal experience, our firm is predominantly female, and we have two really great managing partners who forego their own opportunities, for example, to speak at conferences like this, to provide other opportunities for women that may not have been, you know, originally asked, not necessarily in this instance, but at other places. So I think it's a little bit, it's on, like you were saying, it's on all of us to move things forward. But I think part of it, obviously, and I'll let Ashley speak to this, is around, you know, when you're coming back from potentially, you know, your child rearing time and years, that's
Right.
definitely
like
part of it.
if you want to come back, making sure that it's possible to come back. But I think to your question, though, you know, so many women don't want to come back. And I personally think that's totally fine. And it's actually pretty annoying hearing a lot about, like, we have to keep the women in the workforce. Well, actually, like, a lot of us are working. We're just working raising our kids, right? And we're working, like, keeping a great family together, which takes a ton of work. So I think sometimes the conversation is, like, looking at the wrong questions, and there's assumptions that there are problems when there aren't actually problems. There's other problems, but that's not the problem. So that's kind of how I see it, but I do think it's really important that if a woman does want to be CEO and that's actually what she wants with her life's work, that, like, she has equal opportunities, maybe not equal results, but equal opportunities to come back after having kids. They say you can do it all, you just can't do it all at the same time, right? So that's my 2 cents. Any other questions or comments?
Hopefully that was somewhat insightful for you.
Oh, hi, you have a question.
Yeah, it has to do with child.
Oh, wait, hold on, we can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This question has to do with child care, because this seems to be a big issue for women in the workforce. And a lot of them are dropping out of the workforce because of childcare. And there are some solutions, and I don't know if it, government contribution will help. I would like to hear your suggestions as to what might help.
What might help women who want to come back who can't because of childcare constraints? Oh, that is so hard. It's really hard. I don't really have any solutions.
It becomes political,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, one of the reasons we have public schools is to address that. So if you drive it to an earlier age, I mean, other countries outside the US do a much better job of providing the resources and the services. Of course, companies that really want to attract those families can also do it. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but I was telling them last night. I mean, when you look, as much as employment has progressed since the pandemic, we're still somewhere like 80,000 short of childcare positions because it's such a low-paid position. So it's probably not something that we can solve, and it's probably a mix of public policy as well as looking at different performances around the globe, as well as corporate. Certainly, some corporations, if they really wanted to, could.
I was just going to say grandparents.
There's been a lot of discussion in Washington specifically around, trying to push, as Gail was just saying, legislation or to make sure that whether it's people that work in childcare or people that work in any type of whether it's elder care or they're taking care of an aging parent, that there are more regulations put in place to protect some of these people, because a lot of them they don't have benefits, they don't have a 401k, they don't have health insurance through an employer. It's, they're going on the open market to find it. And while they may be getting competitive pay, it's not as much as they could potentially make if they were going into a different, more traditional type of workforce. And I think that contributes to some of the shortage problems that we're seeing, or not being able to find adequate folks that you would trust to come into your home and take care of your kids, or aging family members or things like that. So
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think it's a narrow path, because the more expensive the childcare becomes, ultimately you do the math as the mother and the person who wants to go be CEO, and you say, it doesn't make economic sense for my family to pay a 401k for someone who can't do better because they didn't go to college, and so they're stuck working in my house, and now they want a 401k. So you know what? I'm not going back to work. I'm not going to be CEO. Doors are closed to me. I'm going to stay home and raise my kids because that's what we can afford. I think that's the extreme, right, of what you just said.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's like a very narrow path, but I'll maybe wrap it up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'd love to
Thank
go
you,
on.
guys.
We're running a little late
Yeah,
here.
thank you.
That was really great. Thanks
Thank
to the
you,
audience
everyone.
for getting involved too.